you may recall, those of you who were here last week, we looked at two of the feminine deific figures of antiquity and, say, late antiquity, and that one of these was the figure of the Gnostic Sophia, the embodiment of wisdom, which we will mention to some extent this evening, and more about her next week. But we also presented a little rewritten version of the Sophia mythos that I wrote some years ago, and we read that last Friday, and I think it was of interest. And then we will draw together as well as we can all of these disparate subjects. And this evening I will sort of project out a number of versions, a number of myths of the mysterious feminine principle from different traditions. There may be so many of them tonight that they'll be bewildering, but I promise you that we will pull them all together into a more workable and understandable picture and scheme next week. What we introduced last week was the fact that as enunciated in literary form by the great poet, and really probably the greatest poet of the English language of the 20th century, Robert Graves, in his book The White Goddess, there are, let's say, there are several major manifestations in the myths and rituals of the world of the goddess figure, and the oldest and in many ways the most pervasive of these being the one that Robert Graves named The White Goddess. It was quite a popular book, I think sort of in the early 1960s, and if you find a copy of it somewhere, it is really very worthwhile reading. Robert Graves is a fascinating writer, a man of immense mythological and historical knowledge, and on top of that, a major poet who, even when he writes prose, writes in a very poetic manner, very interesting man. He served in World War I, and then he was in his, I think, in his early 30s, and he retired. He felt that it was time to retire. And he even wrote a book about his retirement, which said, "Goodbye to all that." That was the title of the book. So you can kind of figure what sort of a strange Englishman this was. And then he lived for the rest of his life in Mallorca, off the coast of Spain, and there continued writing. And that is where he wrote The White Goddess. Now, what is of interest to us right now is that in addition to, let's say, having given that normative exposition of the White Goddess, toward the latter part of his life, in the 1960s, he made an addition to the material, and it probably states the year when he wrote this. I think it was about 1965. He, on the basis of a long lecture that he gave, he pronounced a new subject, which is yet an addition to the earlier one, which is that of the black goddess. And now, since some of you were not here last week, and others like myself may have forgotten, his name, the white goddess, was given sort of to the overweening, archaic, feminine goddess figure, which many cultural anthropologists and historians have postulated as having been perhaps the first sort of universal deity of humanity once it emerged out of its very origins. A mother figure which is at the same time also very disciplinarian, and sacrifices are to be made to her and so forth. And let's say a very powerful but at the same time very ambivalent mythological figure. By ambivalent I mean that if you think that the white goddess, as Robert Graves unearthed her, let's say, is all nicey nice, then you got something coming. She is sometimes nice and sometimes not so nice. So I think we have become a little bit too much indoctrinated with the notion, which doesn't really bear out in Judaism and Christianity and Islam either, in the monotheistic faith, that the monotheistic God is all good. And you read the Old Testament and some of the things that go on there as the result of the will of the Lord God Adonai, you'll find out that a lot of it is not very nice. So neither is the great goddess. I mentioned also that the concept of this universal goddess figure, which at one time is said to have ruled probably over all of humanity in a religious or spiritual sense, was largely formulated in the late 19th century by a Swiss-German scholar, Johann Jakob Backhofen, in his book The Great Goddess. And later on, some of the Jungian psychologists had picked that up in a psychological sense and made a good contribution there. Particularly Erich Neumann, in his book about the Great Goddess. Erich Neumann is generally regarded as the most brilliant of the people associated with C.G. Jung in his lifetime, and also Esther Harding in a depth psychological sense. So that is the kind of the story of the white goddess. Let's say all of these theories, since they deal with obscure traditions and mythologems of ancient humanity, are not terribly easy to make sense of. And therefore the pronouncements that one makes about these are to be taken a bit with a grain of salt, which is also true of Robert Graves' material, although he's so poetic and so powerful in his writing that one forgives him for it. Now, interestingly enough, in about 1965, Robert Graves sort of changed his tune a little bit. And it's in a long essay, which was a long lecture that I don't need to read to you, but I will I will give you the concluding paragraph of his treatise on the Black Goddess. The Black Goddess is so far hardly more than a word of hope, whispered among the few who have served their apprenticeship to the White Goddess. And he envisions a sort of evolutionary development in this particular God concept, or maybe in this case we could call it Goddess concept. She promises a new pacific bond between men and women, where one dearly wishes that that promise would be fulfilled, corresponding to a final reality of love in which the patriarchal marriage bond may fade away. Unlike Vesta, the Black Goddess, this is Vesta being one of the most evident manifestations in his view of the White Goddess, because Vesta is the Greco-Roman goddess of the home, the patroness of cooks, and sort of the divine Hausfrau, to use another language. So unlike Vesta, the Black Goddess has experienced good and evil, love and hate, truth and falsehood in the person of her sisters, but chooses what is good, rejecting serpent love and corpse flesh. This is real Robert Graves. He loves these kinds of metaphors. Faithful as Vesta, gay and adventurous as the White Goddess, she will lead man back to that sure instinct of love, which he long ago forfeited by intellectual pride. It is idle to speculate what poets will then become, or whether the same woman can in fact be by a sudden spectacular change in her nature, play two diverse parts in one lifetime. Everything is possible. The Black Goddess may even appear disembodied rather than incarnate. And this is a very important sentence. Does it matter? Poets, at any rate, will no longer be bullied into false complacency by the submissive sweetness of Vesta, or be dependent on the unpredictable vagaries of Anata Ishtar Eurydice. So, anyways, a new goddess image, which would be, let's say, an improvement on the earlier ones, and in many ways a sort of benign and happy synthesis of their qualities. So with that hint of the great poet about what may be coming, we'll try to take a look at what is actually taking place, and also what has been represented as having taken place earlier in some of the great spiritual myths, especially of the Mediterranean, the Middle Eastern, and consequently in Western culture. So one of the important, truly very important phenomena, which we need to consider perhaps at the very beginning, or maybe series of phenomena, which is of great importance for our age, is something that maybe at first hearing some of us, not myself, but some of us kind of recoil, because it's too historical, although it is taking place at the present, and it's too conventional. You know, we like the unusual. I'll promise you a few. If you want unusual, I promise you a little before we are finished tonight. So that let's say, you know, the trouble with really our culture at the present time is that for various reasons, good or bad, our culture has become tired of its traditional religious matrix. And as such, when you hear Christianity or when you hear Catholicism, and you cannot hear about Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy without hearing about the Virgin Mary, or in Greek the Theotokos, but you know, the culture has grown tired of these, except in the places where they were forbidden and persecuted for at least half a century, like Russia, where the veneration of the Blessed Virgin of the Theotokos is in big straits now, and also in the Eastern European countries, which includes my own homeland, Hungary. Their devotion to the divine feminine and just basically to their religion has been suppressed by the communist regimes for so long that now they are making up for it. And you know what? They're pretty happy with making up for it too. And I wouldn't be surprised in possibly diagnosing that in a spiritual and psychological sense, their people are a lot happier than the Western European countries and the United States. In any event, the reason I bring that up is because what I am now going to just very quickly catalog here is the fact that our age, right now in the last 100 years, is the accelerating manifestation of the divine feminine in the form of the miraculous, or at least declaredly miraculous apparitions attributed to the Blessed Virgin Mary, and we actually can figure about the last 200 years, so I shorted it by 100. The French Revolution and its more gentle forerunner, the movement of the Enlightenment, brought to the fore a phenomenon that became to be known as the cult of reason. Curiously enough, the Romantic French envisioned reason as feminine, as a goddess. And at the height of the revolution of revolutionary excess, even trying to institute a sort of religion of the goddess of reason. The culminating act of this is during the Great French Revolution. The culminary act of this movement was that some revolutionaries paraded through the streets of Paris a carriage bearing a small-time actress of the stage who represented the goddess of reason and who was then enthroned on the high altar of Notre Dame Cathedral and worshipped by the enthusiastic crowd. Only the French could do something like that. You can't imagine Germans doing anything that weird. Maybe weirder, in another direction, you know. Yeah, right. But in any event, so the goddess of reason, needless to say, was not very compatible with the Madonna of tradition, whether white or black. And it was but a few decades later, in the 19th century, that a wave of apparitions, many of them seemingly miraculous, of the Madonna, reasserted the ancient archetype of the traditional Virgin in Europe. Lourdes, La Salette, Rudebach, and Knock were all locales where dramatic manifestations of the Virgin took place. And certainly their importance grew. Then came the 20th century with its rising anti-religious forces such as Marxism and the Hitlerian National Socialism. After the Pope of Rome solemnly endorsed the 19th century apparitions and the earlier Virgin and Black Virgin miracles, his pronouncements between 1860 and 1890, a new wave of phenomena arose after the turn of the century. Some of these, such as those of Fatima, Banneux, and Boré. Banneux is in Belgium, a very beautiful place. Fortunately, I've been there. Were authorized and recognized by the Catholic Church, while others like Garabandal and Zeytun some years ago, and Medjugorje in Yugoslavia more recently, in more recent time, were the latter two became what have been called, and I quote, the blossoming of unofficial roses, because they were not recognized by the Church. To use the words of a contemporary writer, neither are the miraculous manifestations confined to Roman Catholic lands. Not long ago, there has been a major apparition of the Madonna among the Coptic Christians in Egypt, and there are persistent rumors of miraculous phenomena connected with the Virgin in Russia, especially since the collapse of the Soviet Union. And initially these were distorted and suppressed by the atheistic state, but have ultimately emerged from there. Maybe just a very interesting synchronistic event along those lines that comes to my mind was the re-emergence of the miraculous Virgin of Vladimir, as she is called. It's one of the three most important sacred icons of Russia. Well, the Vladimir Madonna icon disappeared at the time of the Russian Revolution. And you know, it was a heck of a long time ago, and nobody knew where it was or whether it was anywhere. The common assumption was that it had been destroyed, like many other things. The day that the Soviet Union can be said to have collapsed, the day when the heroic Boris Yeltsin got up on top of the tank and shook his fists at the communists, that day the miraculous Madonna of Vladimir reappeared in London. Just somebody brought it into a store and said, say, here's a beautiful old picture, you might want to buy it. Nobody knows where it came from, nobody where it was all of this time, and now of course is greatly revered back in Russia. So you know, these are some of the less spectacular miraculous events, which, however, are still quite impressive. So according to the Roman Catholic Church records, there have been more and there is no need to sneer at these expressions, because if you look at the details, which are often the results of very thorough investigations of these events, that really highly unusual phenomena occurred in connection with these. And so to call them miraculous apparitions, I don't think is so much of an overstatement. That there have been more miraculous apparitions of the Virgin during the last 150 years than in any other comparable time period in the history of the Christian Church. Now that's a pretty big statement. La Salette in France in 1846 marked the beginning of the cycle, and its major high points were Lourdes in 1858, Fatima in 1917, and San Sebastian de Garabandal between 1961 and 1965. If we add to this the promulgation of the dogma of the Immaculate Conception in the late 19th century by Pope Pius IX, and the dogma of the Assumption of the Virgin in 1950 by Pope Pius XII, we can see that a mighty movement of the feminine archetype has occurred in this time period, and that the Roman Catholic Church certainly noted it and responded to it in its own fashion. In order to lend maybe some additional credence to that, I well remember in 1950, which was just probably a year and a half before I got on the boat and came over to the United States, when Pope Pius XII proclaimed the Assumption of the Virgin. I won't regale you with the personal circumstances under which I listened to his voice on the radio, I and my family, but let us say not so terribly far away north of Rome, in Zurich, there was a doctor who was the descendant of 3 generations of Protestant pastors, and the doctor's name was Carl Gustav Jung. And you know, Jung was ecstatic over that particular development. He said, now it is beginning, because he saw in, you know what the assumption is. It's not to assume something in our mind, but it is an ancient belief in Christendom which was formally declared in the Western Church at that time, that the Blessed Virgin Mary, upon her death, was bodily assumed into heaven and is now there with the deity. And Jung saw in this the apotheosis, the deification, the raising up of the feminine, that now we have a feminine person in heaven right there with God, and that this is an extremely important psycho-spiritual event which heralds a development in the culture which would probably begin right then. And of course, all the concern with the role of the feminine in society and in religion and everywhere else, the great concern just started very soon thereafter, and in various ways continued to the present time. So I think Jung's elation over that particular event was certainly not mistaken. Now, let's just stop for a minute and see what can we construe as being the meaning of these data, and we'll come to some others. First of all, that something is happening to which we ought to pay attention. A phenomenon, especially a phenomenon that has spiritual or occult or religious overtones, should always be regarded as a signal. Whether it occurs in your own, bedroom or in your kitchen, or whether it occurs in the culture in general, when a paranormal phenomenon occurs, somebody is knocking at your door. Somebody is saying, hey, pay attention. And that's why it's unusual. That's why it's occult. That's why it's paranormal. Because if it were normal, you wouldn't pay any attention. If it's paranormal, you do pay attention. So this is something really to remember for us. Along with countless millions of people, I and members of my family have been, experiencers of, partakers of some paranormal phenomena. And somehow we always had the good sense to say, hey, somebody is trying to tell me something. Let's see what the meaning of this is. But of course, there are a lot of people who, they are not all that much oriented to meaning. They are oriented to facts. Oh, look at the weird thing that happened. I don't know, a chair levitated from my front door to my back door. To which, of course, unless some meaning can be attributed to these events, I would answer with the great mantra, so what? So this is an important principle, folks, in everything. What does it mean? And by meaning, we don't mean that it means something else. Now, sometimes paranormal phenomena will do that. I think that in a lot of families there has been, for instance, a grandfather clock stopped at a particular point, and maybe grandma or grandpa has been ailing already. Maybe grandma just died. So pick up the phone if there was a phone already and find out, and usually it's true. So that kind of meaning. But there is the other kind of meaning which in many ways is really more important, which is interior psychological meaning. When something happens to you, as the result, or at least heralded by a sign, and you say, oh yes, and it's not a specific meaning, not an announcement of fact, but it is an announcement of an interior reality and of an interior process. That's the kind of meaning that, I should say, it's the kind of meaning that we mean when we say, what's the meaning of my life? And therefore, that sort of thing is very important. So I would say that these events on the religious scene are undoubtedly signals on a wider scale, which are probably calculated to call attention to themselves in a spiritual sense. And that, of course, is always the case. Miracles, apparitions, visions, and synchronistic events indicating a larger vital meaning. A physical phenomenon, however, is but one half of the synchronicity. Why? Because any synchronicity, if you study the subject of synchronicity, which I don't blame you if you haven't studied it much, because it's probably the most obscure of the arsenal of strange things that appeared in the writings and in the discoveries of C.G. Jung. But synchronicity consists in main or at least two elements. One is a physical phenomenon, something that calls attention. Somebody, very knowledgeable person about Jungian psychology said that it's like a smoke signal in ancient America. Something is signalizing to you, like I said before, hey, look, pay attention, something is happening, and that's the signal. And then connected with the signal, but in a mysterious sort of underground way, is the revelation of some interior meaning which is important for us as individuals, or in some of these cases perhaps important for the culture. So that is why an excessive orientation to facts, a worship of facts, is the worst kind of worship that you can engage in. Because facts as such, unless synchronistically or symbolically they are connected with a deeper meaning, are really quite useless. For one thing, as I quoted, I think, earlier on in one of the talks, as somebody, a very fine and learned man said, the trouble with a fact is that it's finished. You can't do anything with it. It's finished. It's the end of a process, and for that there is nothing creative about a fact. You know, when developments take place, when a process is evolving, when the alchemical vessel is boiling, that's important because something is going to come out of that, because it is moving toward a culmination. It will produce a result, and it is full of signals that come to you in order to make you pay attention. And so in this principle, I think, needs to be applied here also. We may be dealing with here in Western culture, in spite of the decline of formal adherence to religion, in spite of the so-called secularization of the culture, there is something happening here that requires our attention. And this something is not physical. It may have physical phenomena. I mean, if you, from time to time, I listen on the radio or otherwise avail myself of some of the, the more authoritative accounts, for instance, of the miraculous apparition of Fatima in Portugal, and my word, you might, and thousands, 10,000s of people were there observing them. It's mind-boggling, but isn't that what a miracle is supposed to be? And so miracles do exist. What there was an evangelist lady. Anyway, she was a big evangelist here in Los Angeles, not terribly long time ago. anyway, one of her mottos was, some of you may remember, and she had this kind of somewhat southern accent, as so many of those people do. I believe in miracles. Maybe her name will come to our minds, which will be gratifying but not terribly important. No, Amy Semple McPherson was earlier. This lady was sort of in the 1950s. In any event, I believe in miracles. Well, miracles do exist. So this is important to keep in mind. So something has been trying to come forth. Something has been brewing. Something has been bubbling in the great cosmic cauldron for about a couple of 100 years. And now you say, oh, well, this is all Roman Catholic. Well, okay, you may not like some things about the Roman Catholic Church, but the fact of the matter is that these events have affected and continue to affect in a major way millions and millions of people. So these events are extremely influential in terms of the impression that they make. And if for no other reason, we ought to recognize their importance on that basis. Now, this is something that has been happening in the religious world, you see. Well, why is it only happening in the Roman Catholic Church? Well, it does happen in the Orthodox churches too, because their numbers are fewer. But let's say it is not only happening there, because there are other kinds of phenomena that may be happening elsewhere. But let's say if there is something happening in the world psyche, to call it psychologically, in the world soul, if some change is about to take place, and we are all in love with change in politics. We don't care if that change ends up being absolutely wrought something absolutely horrible, as long as it's change, Yeah, sure. So I am always very cautious about change. Oh yeah, change? What kind of change? I'm an old fellow. You just have to look at me. You'll see it. And let's say I've seen a lot of changes. Very few of those changes were for the better. Very few. Keep that in mind when you fall in love with change. Change is exciting in one way or the other. Sometimes more, sometimes less. But the trouble is, excitement is not a hallmark of good things necessarily. That is why people are attracted to various situations that cause strong emotional reactions, whatever they happen to be, collective or individual. But the results of these experiences are seldom very beneficial. The late Gerald Heard, an expatriate British philosopher who hardly anybody knows about him anymore at this time, but one of the great minds of the 20th century, and I remember him speaking here. He was the second speaker after we opened up this place, the first one having been the great Manly Palmer Hall. But let's say Gerald Heard said that there are more addicts of adrenaline in this world than to any other drug. Because of the excitement, it makes you feel alive. Even if it's strange to say, even fear makes you feel alive. Even the fear of death makes you feel alive. My uncle was a pilot and a fighter pilot during World War II, and he said that. And I asked him, I said, Uncle, did you really enjoy flying over in a plane over the Ukraine and being shot at by Soviet fighters and things like that, and see your colleagues go down and things? He said, excitement, my boy. Even when you are afraid, you are excited. And that excitement in itself is a certain payoff. But I must say, I would rather be excited about something else than about being shot down immediately. But so we have to be we have to pay attention when strange, unusual, and weird things are happening, and try to be receptive to the meaning that may try to reveal itself to us. And that, I think, is certainly true in this regard also. Now, excuse me. So, let's say, in one of the Gnostic scriptures, which are my favorites, the Gospel of Philip is a saying, "Truth did not come into the world naked, but it came in the types and images." So, let's say, while the factual, the physical, the quasi-physical result of a phenomenon of this sort may not be its most important aspect, it is nevertheless important. Look, for instance, at the image at the famous miraculous event of Lourdes. The locale is one whose healing centers for illnesses were located there already in Roman times. It was a healing place for a long, long time. Also, it is known that Mother Goddess shrines were located ages ago in several places in the province of Bigorre, where Lourdes is located. Marie Bernard Soubirous, who came to be known as Saint Bernadette, had no idea as to whom she saw, or that it was supposed to be the Virgin Mary. She didn't know who she saw, and she heard a voice and saw a lady clad in white with a blue sash around her waist. After all, you have to remember that you were still in France, and even an apparition was elegant, I'll say. With bare feet and with a yellow rose on each foot, which made the elegance even more apparent. So she never identified herself to Saint Bernadette as the Virgin Mary. In fact, she did not introduce herself by name at all. All the urging of the local priest that came down on poor Bernadette, at these urgings, she asked the lady for her name. That was having a lot of guts, I would say. And the apparition grudgingly said, que soy el Inmaculada Concepción, which is in the local sort of semi-Spanish language, I am the Immaculate Conception. This she said only after failing to respond to Bernadotte's questions twice. This behavior is not unlike that exhibited by many apparitions of the Madonna. She doesn't like to be questioned. It is generally assumed that they are indeed the Virgin Mary, and sometimes they are maneuvered into saying that they are indeed that person. Could it be that the feminine deity thus manifesting wants to guard her identity as separate from the image attributed to her, and that she humors the devotees who need to identify her with the Christian Virgin Mary? This is something that we will probably never really know. Now, Bernadette Soubirous, whom I started out with, always referred to the lady in her own Pyrenean dialect as aquero, which meaning that one. That one. Perhaps that ought to be a good name we could use. Indeed, she is that one. So we have a movement of that one taking place. The one who came at Lourdes as a fair young woman of possibly about 14, 15 years of age, that one who visited the Aztec Indian Juan Diego as an American Indian woman of nondescript age, and that one who has been with us since the early history of Christian Europe as the Black Madonna, depicted largely in statuary in many, many places all over the place. I mentioned last time, and I recommend again, that the best, most informative and not very long work on that subject is The Black Madonnas by Ian Begg, E-A-N-B-E-G-G, a British Jungian writer who put together an excellent book. Among others, if you should develop a vital personal interest in the subject, it has a complete list of the location of the Black Madonnas all over the world. So you only got to take Ian Begg's book and then go down the list. So now we are going to travel here to see a Black Madonna, now we are going to go there to see a Black Madonna, which might be fun, especially if you don't have anything more exciting to do. Here, so we have, let's say, we have now allusions here to the, let's say, the contemporary manifestation of the archetype and its historic role throughout Christendom. Yet the earlier manifestations and images are important also. Well, I will now jump around from one to the other to some of the early mythic manifestations which are really important, to give us an impression as to how these strange and often ambivalent feminine figures and apparitions, miraculous beings have appeared throughout the history of the world. There is no beginning point for the mysterious, the dark goddess image, the black goddess image, to use the words of the poet. Yet there is a scripture in Semitic tradition that points to an early archetypal image. and perhaps some of you have guessed it already. I'm not specifically speaking of the black goddess. It is the Song of Songs, sometimes more Latinized, called the Canticle of Canticles, the Song of Songs of Solomon, where seemingly a man in love sings, and where a woman in love sings to her royal lover, who is said to be King Solomon, "I am black but beautiful." That's in the first chapter, 5th verse. Who is she? In biblical scholarship, she's called the Shulamite, which is a name containing the word shalom, peace. Even as Solomon, her lover, has a name containing the same term, peace. So here we may need to keep in mind a long descent of the mystery of the dark feminine figure. Possibly one might say that this has a relationship, certainly the Gnostics would have said so, to the wise serpent in paradise. You say, no, how do you get that? What did we say about her at other times? Nature, both nature of out there and our inner nature. So the wisdom starts out perhaps in many of the ancient scriptures, which no doubt have been superseded in many ways as the wisdom of the animal nature. So the wisdom of the instincts. But why black? Because she has moved into the shadows. So let's say this is I'm approaching it now from different angles. But let's say if indeed, let's say there was an early veneration of a wisdom that, like the serpent of paradise, arises out of nature, but a wisdom that at the same time can also point beyond nature, then this wisdom is to be paid attention to. But since it has taken a second place to other figures which appear in the light, it has become dark. Let's say, when we turn this to the individual, we have all sorts of powers within us. We are persons of multiple components. In fact, that was one of the very first psychological recognitions that C.G. Jung came to after he started collaborating with Sigmund Freud and so forth, that we are not really unitary beings. We consist of many part selves, and that one of the tasks, let us say, of the human is to put all these part selves together and to become a unified being, an individuum, as we would call it in German, because it's indivisible, and that And therefore, there are these various tasks that exist within us. There are very early in biblical literature already we see the indications, the movements of a deific feminine figure, which, however, has moved into the shadows and therefore has become dark. And as Ian Begg and others have sort of theorized, that this may be the ancestress, so to say, of the Black Madonnas. So this is one. Such then is one of the original Black Madonnas of the world, the image of the Shulamite, the Queen of Sheba, both as seen by the ancient Solomon and by modern Solomons like Robert Graves. So let us look at another. And this one is a little more off-putting. This one is a little more gruesome. But it still indicates this strange way in which in the practice and in the imagination of humanity, the feminine spirit has been turned this way and that way. Let's see what we are dealing with now. So don't shudder and don't scream and run away. The proto-Black Madonna here is called Lilith. In an 11th century Kabbalistic scripture, which is called the Alphabet of Ben Sira, we find the story of Lilith. And I'll very quickly tell it to you. So the first man and woman were not Adam and Eve, according to this Kabbalistic scripture, but rather Adam and Lilith. They were the same substance, they were equal, but they were, in some mysterious way, they were joined in their body. Lilith resented the fact that Adam always wanted her to, the Kabbalists are very sexy people, so they come up with some interesting things. That Adam always wanted her to have sex a particular way, and no others. So she she invoked a great magical name, which was the magical or ineffable name of God, and immediately she had wings. She gave herself wings. And she departed from paradise and from Adam. Bye-bye, Adam. Adam was pretty unhappy. So he started praying, and as a response to his prayers, there came a number of angels. And these angels, who were 3 in number, and I can't really be certain from the basis of this source, but I think that they were either the equivalent or actually of the 3 archangels that appear in the Bible, namely Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael. So these angels came and they were going to help Adam and bring Lilith back. So they went out to capture her, but they did not succeed. So, not even angels can do everything. So she was became the queen of the night demons, which is, I would say, a pretty responsible but difficult position. And she was given power over the life, especially of newborn infants, whom, if she wanted to, she could kill. And so this became, in ancient Judaism, became quite an important issue, that families had to protect their babies from Lilith, who would come and kill them. And you can even now, if you go to the right places, find amulets prepared by Orthodox, mostly Hasidic Jewish people. And these amulets are of protection from Lilith. And they are to be hung up over the bed or cradle or whatever other receptacle it has of the baby. The amulets more often than not contain the names of the three angels who were called to defend Adam and to help him against Lilith. So her further career, the career of Lilith, after the death of Abel in Genesis, Adam was still there, and she came to visit him secretly on and off. And let's say these visits were not of a chaste nature. So magical children were begotten, some of whom became the great teachers of languages and of magic, the children of Adam and Lilith. So by the 16th century she was regarded as an aspect of Malkuth, the lowest Sephirah, but she was the Cliffa of Malkuth. Now, each one of the Sephirot, the vessels, the 10 vessels on the Etz Chaim, on the tree of life, has well, shall we say, an unpleasant aspect or counterpart, and those are the Cliffa. So let's say, and the name Lilith appears in other myths of the Middle Eastern origin. I don't think you are that interested in the technicalities, but Lilith even appears in the Ginza of the Mandeans. And there what she is converted to the light and eventually elevated up to the highest deity. So let's say instinctual, sexual, dark anima, feminine figures come back and are eventually, like in the Mandean myth, they become an ingredient of wholeness, so that ultimately no spirit that is really part of humanity, no spirit in us, no matter how goofy it may be, is ultimately lost. And that I think is a very important element when it is understood especially in a psychological sense, that we don't need to repress and suppress an awful lot of our own psychological forces, but we need to work for their transformation and their eventual elevation into a high and good condition. While in Lilith we find the image of the instinctual and natural feminine, we find others in the ancient Babylonian myths where also we find the interaction of Inanna, the goddess, and Enki, and the eventual, let's say, elevation into a high and holy place of the feminine figure. So I shared with you with what might have appeared to you initially as these outlandish stories indicating that humanity has been concerned for an awfully long time with the presence in life of a feminine, what may be called a feminine force, and its possibility of being transformed from an instinctual into an ever more subtle and more high and more sacred kind of condition. What do all of these stories leave us with? A dark goddess of instinct and nature, Lilith, Inanna, maybe even Kali, Anat, comes in the Solomonic wisdom literature into her own, when appearing as the dark Shulamite and the Queen of Sheba. So there has been a development, an elevation of the feminine principle. She comes from the dark land, namely the Queen of Sheba, from Abyssinia, from Black Africa. You know, Abyssinia is the old name of Ethiopia, and it was envisioned because it was envisioned as being, and there are big mountain plateaus there, as the land that is down below the mountains in the abyss, so she comes from Abyssinia, the land of the abyss, to bring her gift of love to Solomon. We come back to there. Who, while wise, is not yet whole without her. So wholeness must of necessity include the darkness. What is darkness depends largely on the psychological state and orientation of the individual. One person's darkness is perhaps another's light, but there are certain general conditions in culture which allow us to make some more universal statements. And so it's in its drive for awareness. Speaking now of these matters as one should be able to concerning all myths, speaking of these matters on an individual level, because every mythology, while it is projected onto an outer theatrical performance, exists within the individual. So what we have we have a dominant figure within us, which is the ego. It drives much feeling and instinct into the dark and on the ground. The wisdom of the serpent is largely lost to us. The serpentine wisdom is not frequently symbolized as feminine, although occasionally there are masculine expressions as well, such as Pan, the god of nature, or the natural all. It must be recognized that in remote historical periods, such suppression is to some extent justified. It is a sacrifice the mind must make for the sake of consciousness. But as the ancients always knew, nothing is truly lost. The sacrificed, the repressed, the dead, the dismembered, the exiled return to life and return to wholeness. And so what we need to recognize, among others, is that some components of the black goddess come from the natural portion of the human, which, because of the development of consciousness, because of the development of the ego, had to be repressed, had to be driven underground. But in the economy of nature, which is also the economy of our spiritual nature, nothing is ever lost. And so what we had to chase out of our house, the house of our ego, because it became troublesome, has not gone away. In fact, there is a Latin saying, naturam expellas furca, tamen usque recurret. You can chase out nature with a pitchfork, but she'll be coming back. And so this is a very peculiar and difficult subject, but it, let's say, its expression in the personal psychology of the individual has to do with what Jung called the shadow. We were dealing with material of mind, material of experience, all of us, when we were children, and way back at the time of the childhood of the human race, that had to be dealt with, and that were very difficult to deal with. And so when the ego development takes place, and thereafter, there are various psychological factors that are driven underground, and they became the so-called shadow. Yet, this shadow is a component of the black goddess. I know this is difficult to deal with, but in order to reconstitute the deific feminine, we have to rescue the black goddess from the shadowland where we have initially banished it. We need to redeem those portions of ourselves which especially a masculine culture had taught us to repress, so that they might become part of the whole. We have to recognize that our purpose in life is not to be smart, it's not to be clever, it's not to be terribly efficient and skilled in the ways of the world, for instance, but it is that we have to become whole. And so one of our purposes in life is to seek out what belongs to us, what is ours, but at the same time has been, by us to a very large extent, has been banished to outer darkness, and there lingers. It becomes a Lilith, becomes a menacing presence, also, and so forth. But with our descent into the underworld, with our recovering and rediscovering these lost portions of ourselves and of our humanity, we can move toward the wholeness. And so I know this was a very convoluted and very difficult subject today. But what I was trying to convey was that when dealing with what has been called the black goddess, we are also dealing with the cosmically and certainly culturally repressed deific feminine that is within us and that is within the world. And so one of the reasons for that has been certainly the monotheistic God concept, which had a difficult time dealing with the goddess concept and so forth. But there is a natural, instinctual and psychological femininity that dwells in our unconscious, and that is in need of rescuing, that needs to be brought forth. And when it is brought forth, then it has the capacity to unite with the celestial and probably far more spiritually developed, far more wise feminine aspects, and thus work for wholeness. So we have a task, and that's a task of those who are in a masculine body or in a feminine body, and that is to rescue the black goddess that dwells deeply within us, because it has been banished there by culture, by religion, by the inability of the human character to cope with wholeness. And so there are many mythologies that point in that direction. For instance, I think Albrecht Dürer who has, of course, magnificent pictures about everything, has one of my favorite pictures, which has to do with the rescuing of the souls in Hades by Jesus. So there's an opening into the earth. This is, of course, what mythology indicated that occurs on Maundy Thursday after Jesus goes into the darkness on Friday. There's an opening into the earth, and he's kneeling there, his head blazing with light, and he's reaching into this opening and pulling out the souls that have been lost in Hades, and they're coming out. So this is something of this sort that we need to undertake, and it came to me with considerable conviction that while we are looking, and I'll certainly show you some of the marvelous ways in which it appears in Gnostic cosmology and so forth on the next occasion, but before we really merit that, before we can go and contact the deific feminine in the aeons, we need to have rescued the banished, the repressed, the tormented primeval feminine, the black goddess inside of ourselves. And of course, there is nothing that happens in life and in the culture that does not have a relationship to depth psychological symbolism, even though it might be expressed in an inadequate fashion. But it is quite possible that all this confusion that is taking place at the present time about the sexes, of men wishing to become women, or women wishing to become men, this, let's say, a powerful and unconscious longing for the androgyne has to do with the longing for wholeness. Now, I think when, like in so many other things, when a psychological condition is made physical, when it is, as we say in psychology, it is lived out rather than psychological assimilated, and usually doesn't turn out too well. For which reason I think a lot of the sex changes and things like that going on in the culture now are, to say the least, hazardous. There are great psychological hazards there that people are not aware of. But we have to become whole in order to be prepared to soar into the aeons, in order to be prepared to walk across the bridge of nous from the personal to the transcendental and the transpersonal. In order to begin to move into heaven, we have to become more complete and more whole than we are. And so when we are looking for the, quote, goddess, we need to look for that part of it that has been repressed, that has been pushed on the ground, and that has become, like Lilith, the queen of the night. But interesting, we have that ability, we have that power, because these are all parts of ourselves. These are our spiritual offspring. These respond to our call. And so we have to be there at the borderland of the light and the dark, of the conscious and the unconscious, of the masculine and the feminine, and to call forth to all of them in order to come together and be united. Because only with a united effort of all of these psycho-spiritual parts of ourselves will we be able to move higher and into the spirit. Our task in this world is not to be smart, not to be good, not to be learned, not to have a lot of technology, but to be whole. And when we address ourselves to that, then we are preparing the vessel for the ultimate union. And in that ultimate union, the great celestial deific figures, feminine deific figures, will play a very important role. But before we can go to the beings of the light and remain there, we will have to have picked up the neglected, the tormented, the banished little beings of darkness, among them this black goddess, and take her with us. And when we can do that, then wholeness is assured. Now, this was a difficult subject, and it wasn't only a difficult subject for you, it was a difficult subject for me. But nevertheless, it was something that came to me with considerable intuitive force. That when I looked again at Robert Graves and things of the Black Goddess, that the Black Goddess is the goddess that we have banished into the darkness, that we have to get hold of her, that we have to give her our arm and lead her to the light. And when that obtains, then there is wholeness. And then as Madame Blavatsky said at the end of one of her beautiful long poetic statements, then our future is the future of a being whose growth and splendor, whose magnificence have no limit. But in order to do that, we have become whole. So let us strive for wholeness. Let us pick up those banished portions of ourselves which are in the dark. And together we will go to a condition, to a marvel, to an ineffable greatness, yes, the growth and splendor of which will have no limit. So pardon me for the somewhat rambling and the somewhat obscure presentation, and I assure you that the motivation behind them was an important discovery, an important insight that came to me within the last few days and that I wanted to convey to you. I mean, we will be able, I even will have some pictorial material, God willing, for you next Friday to bring all of this together in a great Gnostic psycho-spiritual universe wherein we will see the presence and the nature of all these various goddess figures and how they indeed can be conducive to our wholeness now and in eternity. So I thank you very much for having borne with me in this little struggle, but I assure you it points somewhere, and some of it we will be able to discover on the next occasion. Meanwhile, God bless you and thank you very much.